Well, hello there, and welcome to Food Lab Talk. I'm your host, Michael Bakker. Today, we're going to explore the intersections of food, sustainability, and social impact with a visionary in the world of food systems, Deb Eschmeyer. A food systems policy expert and social impact entrepreneur, Deb has dedicated her career to the betterment of society. From co-founding the national nonprofit Food Corp to serving as executive director of Michelle Obama's Let's Move initiative and driving change in the food industry, Deb's efforts have permanently influenced the way we think about food and health. She's a trailblazer and an authentic leader whose life's work is building a healthier, more equitable food future for all. Deb, it's such a pleasure to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Michael.
We're going to have a lot of fun. I just want to go back to earlier parts of your career. You explained to me that you're always interested in mission-driven work. What drove you to that? Was it the way you grew up? Was it just it came to you? What made you ultimately so focused on that?
It's difficult to explain. I think it's always just been who I am. I don't know, maybe it's the youngest of 7 and always trying to make sure I was heard. I mean, that actually could be part of it. I don't know what birth order you fall in, Michael, but I think sometimes that does make a difference where I always had to advocate for myself, just even at the dinner table.
Yeah, I can relate to you. I'm 7 out of 8.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's uncanny. See, maybe you just got to be number 7.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think the other one I think people are probably interested in is learning a little bit more from how do you end up in the White House? So can you talk a little bit more, because I think it has to do with the organization you were involved with prior. But if I'm a youngster and I say, I think I would love to work for the White House, how do you get there?
Yeah. I wholeheartedly encourage folks to have some form of public service in their career journey. One, it is a tremendous opportunity to develop multifaceted skills. Their average age in DC, by the way, is like 27 for those that work on the Hill, because you're taking on every single issue. You have to become an expert from everything from environmental policy to, you name it. You got to be able to turn on the dime and you have to figure it out. The thing for me on this one is that I'm always curious, right? About how does a policy become a law? How does an idea get to fruition? How does something go to scale? And I never assume I know the answer. And I think part of the issue, what worked really well in developing Food Corp in my 20s was being naive and humble and bold enough to think that our idea could actually work. It was going against a whole bunch of people who thought, why do we need to do this? And the whole concept of Food Corp was that when we talked to the 4,000 stakeholders and just asked a whole bunch of questions about what do you need, most people would think the answer was just money. We need more funding for this. We need more funding for food. It actually came down to human capital. They needed more trained individuals on the ground in the schools to help execute on everything they're working on. Yes, you definitely need more federal dollars. Yes, you definitely need more equipment. Yes, you need more knives. Yes, you need better ovens for farm fresh cooking and what have you. But really, you need the people to do it. You need the execution, and you need the folks to be able to say, I have someone on the ground who's going to connect with the farmer, who's going to connect with the teacher, who's going to connect with food service directors. And this was how we figured out the AmeriCorps was such a tremendous partner in doing this, and this public service arm. And I really became this wholehearted advocate for national service. And the journey wasn't about some kind of application process or taking a certain course at a school. It was showing up. I have to say it was kind of funny. At the time, Sam Cass was the executive director of Let's Move. And at one point I counted the number of emails I sent him and he responded to, and I think it was something like 167 emails and he responded to 3. And it didn't stop me. I was like, you know what? I know they're busy. I'm like, there's this piece of legislation that you should be following. And I did this across the board. I did this for the Office of Management and Budget. I did this for the USDA. I did this for the FDA. And I just was basically, I was relentless. I wasn't trying to be annoying. It was more about I'm following this issue really closely. I'm talking to all the groundswell. I'm talking to the folks on the ground. And this is actually what we need. And we had the data. We had the local data. We were doing it in schools in North Carolina and Mississippi and Oregon and Michigan. And like, I can tell you that what you're doing on the national level, I can give you data to show that it's working. It was something that we were able to prove that if you had a school garden, that the kids would go to school. The school attendance rate was 100%. So in some schools, it had nothing to do with increased fruit and vegetable consumption. It had to do with everything with getting kids in their seats. Like, it was a whole nother way of looking at it. We had some of our greatest support in one North Carolina school because they saw disciplinary issues go down tremendously on the days that the kids were in the school garden because they were outside burning energy. They were understanding empathy. One of the boys who was constantly in trouble, the teacher had assigned him like planting radishes, and he did it. Everything was great. And then the next morning, they went to the school garden and someone had come in and ripped up everything in the garden. Like, somebody had come through and destroyed it. And that boy, it changed him completely. He understood disruption. He understood, like, he had actually committed some vandalism himself earlier in the school year. It hurt him so much personally that someone did this to his radishes that suddenly he completely changed that day. He understood like the responsibility, the empathy. It was like, this was something, again, well beyond us trying to change the food system. This was like this greater order of magnitude. And that was a really long answer to your question about how do you get to the White House. But basically, it was just being relentless and, talking to as many people as possible and speaking up.
Relentlessly showing up. That's what I'm taking away from your answer.
Yes, that's the summary. That's my book title.
Yeah. I'm really, really not surprised by, but what I actually noticed with your background, you've worked in so many different types of organizations, from your own business, startups, NGOs, government, and then your own commercial organization as well. You have an extraordinary rich and diverse set of experiences. Was it by design, or was it just life happens and just here you are 20 years later and you can look back to this diversity of experiences?
It is a bit by design. I throw academic experience in there too. Like, I worked with Arizona State University when they're standing up their Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems. The beauty that I saw in looking at the different range of all the different ways of changing the food system is that you don't really understand it until you do it. For me, it was like I understood more of the commodity food system growing up on a dairy farm in rural Ohio. I then wanted to understand government, right? By serving in the government and understanding what they're going against. And then I was an actual farmer. I understood what it cost to produce those radishes that the little boy planted. Like, how you're actually selling. When you sell radishes at a farmer's market for $3 a bunch, you're not making any money. Like, to be clear, for the amount of work that it took to plant those radishes and to weed them, to harvest them, everything, you guys, there's no money in radishes. I'm just gonna put it out there. But they're delicious. I'm not gonna smack on radishes. But then going into the nonprofit space and understanding what it takes to raise the money, build up the institution, and establish this like social impact. And then after being in the administration, wanting to understand the corporate side of things, like, right, how do they think? How do they work? How do you take like a product from idea to scale, the marketing, all the avenues of it? And part of it, I wanted to see like, what is my zone of genius, which is one of the things for entrepreneurs that I always recommend. It's like, where is it that you find that you thrive? Like, there is nothing that stops you, that you are actually providing this unique skill set in the world. And I wanted to figure out like, what was the setting that I felt like I was contributing the most, and that I was like selfishly like feel very privileged. Like, I could actually just keep pouring my heart into something and figuring out where am I actually contributing and having some fun along the way and meeting great people. And I think it's just I'm just kind of constantly curious about that and how it works in all the sides. I think where we get in danger is when people really work in silos. I say this all the time to some of the best allies in the food movement, like the people I adore, from Mary Nestle to Michael Pollan, right? It's like, it is really easy to throw stones when you haven't tried to pass a piece of federal legislation. It's just really easy to just bash like the other side. But when you've actually been in their shoes and tried to make change, you develop a level of empathy that I think actually creates greater progress.
I totally agree with you. And I think two things to add to that. So one is, it's so easy, I think, to be an amazing critic because the systems are so complex and therefore there's always something that could be better or that is wrong. I think that is one. But the other one is, I think many of the activists out there are what I would call either single dimensional and don't understand the interdependencies that ultimately show up in the food system on a daily basis. And then, yes, you can focus on your thing and say, That is the most important thing. But the interdependencies and the second consequences, we don't want to talk about because it's too complex.
100%. And you summarized that perfectly. It's really easy to idolize a certain version of the food system that frankly is not actually feasible to feed the public, like to feed the number of mouths that we have to on our globe. There's reasons we have the systems we have today to have a safe and reliable food system, and in a way that it can be, again, affordable and accessible and convenient. And there's times when there's certain pictures of the food system that are painted that I appreciate for the value that they are. But we also have to live in the world of what's pragmatic. Like, what is the goal we're actually trying to achieve in this like sustainable, healthy food system? One of the reasons I went into school food policy was like, it was one of the most regulated meals in the world. Like when you really look at what we've done with nutrition guardrails, making sure it, meets the dietary guidelines that are updated every 5 years. This is a chance to ensure that every child that going in the United States of America has a chance to have a healthy school meal, right? Because the average at the time was like kids were getting like 80% of their calories during the day in school. And so it's like, how are we not using this opportunity to make sure that every child in this nation have a chance to grow up healthy? Because we know this is where they're getting the majority of their calories. So I took this as this challenge. Okay, how do we reform just school food, let alone the rest of the food system, right? And if we could start there, then then we can crack at the rest of it. And this is where we started at this ideal, which was like around what we did with Farm to School and Food Corps. And understanding it, yes, it would be fantastic if every school in America had a scratch cook kitchen, if every school in America had a school garden, every school in America had nutrition education, but then realizing the constraints, right, that every community faces. And that, again, is how we came up with like creating Food Corps, which is like using AmeriCorps programming to instill this like human capital to help achieve some of these goals. But then the rest of the food system, there's so many additional opportunities, whether it's with like corner stores or 7-Elevens or what have you. And how are you making that healthy food more accessible, more convenient, again, more affordable? So that was what was so exciting about getting into Mrs. Obama's work, was because it was looking at every single player in the food system. It was looking at how do you make healthy childcares? How do you make healthy? We had Let's Move Museum. We worked in museums. We looked across the entire sector. We had 225 private sector partnerships to help move the needle on raising a healthier generation. And this is everything from like Nike to Walmart to Disney, you name it. And that's part of the work I really truly do miss from the administration. Was we had this beautiful moment of pushing everyone and holding them accountable to these greater standards, knowing that like we're actually holding everybody accountable to what's best for kids. Like that was the number one goal. Nothing else mattered. It was like, what happens if you put kids first in the food system and then just have everything else decided from there?
I agree. And I would build upon that as well, is that systems change is hard and takes years, if not decades. And I think that, and you described it in your own words as well, is that we love the next shiny toy, the next big buzzword, and we go from A to B to C and to D, where in reality, we need a long-term roadmap, and we need ultimately focus on that long-term approach while agreeing that short-term things might change, but the direction of travel should remain very, very steady. And I think it's one of our biggest challenges. And it's almost like, from a policy perspective, you probably have the biggest impact, but you know better than anybody else. Policy is really, really hard and takes forever. And then the implications or the impact of policy take time as well. But long term, it really, really works. But we're so focused on almost like instant gratification. Let's make a video about it and just get as many likes. And that should drive systems change. And I just don't think it works that way, unfortunately.
No, it doesn't at all. This is actually what's one of the hardest things about public policy making, is because you're dealing with a 4-year term. If you're lucky, it's an 8-year term. And it is generational. Like everything we did with Let's Move, we were looking at the long view. Like our metrics that we were holding ourselves accountable at the time during the Let's Move in the Obama administration was for 2030. Like that's what we were setting goals for. It's like you have to tell the public, actually, we're not going to see the results and probably till 2032, 2034, that everything that we were doing was working. Plus, we know that future administrations will probably try to like take back what we did. And even though we knew the things that we had been working on, for example, just even with improving the school meal standards, like how hard we worked in the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, it worked. We actually saw that data right away, especially for vulnerable children. Just today, the USDA just actually rolled out the new and approved school nutrition standards, reducing added sugars, lower sodium. And it's almost like you have to remind everyone like where we are in this moment in time and how long it takes. And again, it is pure communication, but it is this reminder of what we're trying to do here with smart federal nutrition policy is holding ourselves to the highest and the latest science, which is why the DGAs are actually so important. The amount of effort that we should be putting into the dietary guidelines of Americans is not enough. Like we should all be pushing more on that committee. We should all be pushing for what we believe in, and that includes around sustainability. I actually want to know from you, Michael, like what are you seeing right now as the greatest challenge towards folks understanding the change that's necessary in the food system?
I think first and foremost, lack of true understanding of the interdependencies between these various elements of anything related to both food systems and then food consumption, health and well-being as well. And that if you want to change this, you have to think about all the other elements as well and how it all is tied together. I think that is one. Two is that as a society, we have ultimately brought us to where we are at as of today. The food system we have today, from my perspective, is functioning in the way it was designed. We want different outcomes today, and that therefore we need to come up with an evolution of what we would like it to be. But then we have to acknowledge that the players who've built their livelihoods on functioning that system, you cannot just tell them overnight, that's it, we're going to shift. You have to ultimately figure out longer term how you can ultimately change the system to what you want it to become next. I think the third one is we have to all take more responsibility for, our choices and the impact of our choices as well. And I don't believe that we can continue to believe that there's going to be a pill as a solution of all the things we do. There has to be, a broader understanding of it's all of us who in our own ways have to change, because the system we have as of today is not sustainable for you as an individual, for your family, the community, and the system at large. And I think it requires as well, a more collaborative approach with other states, countries, or regions as well, because we cannot do it alone. And we have our dependencies of what if they do something, it impacts us, and vice versa. But it probably starts with, a country like the US or the EU or any country should have a ministry for food, where it's really about food at large, the way it's being produced, the way it's being processed, handled, distributed, sold, and ultimately being consumed. So there is a true integrated approach to something that is fundamental to us as human beings. We're not there yet, but at the same time, I'm hopeful.
No, I think it's spot on. It's also the complexity of the answer is exactly why we don't have what we wanted, right? Or what we want right now. And what your answer actually made me think about something that I feel like we should be advocating for sooner rather than later, especially during an election cycle. So one thing that was unique about the role that I had in the administration was that it was East and West Wing. And that was obviously very unique to what Mrs. Obama's initiative was. And what we did was we tried to institutionalize the role of nutrition and food and agriculture into the Domestic Policy Council, which is in the West Wing of the White House, right? You're working on every issue. And during the Biden administration, they have staff that are focused on food and ag and nutrition, which is incredible. And it is transformative, but it's not into some formal recognition of like a national food policy council, right? Wouldn't it be incredible if we did have this on a national level, but also a call, for example, the WHO, where we established across almost every country where there would be a similar role and title in the federal government. And it would be one in which you were responsible for this oversight of all the different agencies, because that was, again, what was so unique about Let's Move is that we worked with like 15 different federal agencies. It was a very small team for Mrs. Obama. I mean, we had like 4 staff, but we were working across all these agencies. And you think about it from the USDA to the Department of Interior to HHS, like it was this massive undertaking. The only way that this changes in our food systems is if we do institutionalize this at the federal level. The complexity of the nature of what we're trying to fix. It does not sit solely at the USDA. It doesn't sit at the Department of Transportation. It does not, right? It's like it does not sit with the FDA. And that is where, because of it's so multi-layered from a government perspective, that's where it gets into the complexity. And you know what I think is actually going to get them there is understanding if we don't change our ways, the food that you eat every day and love will no longer be available, right? Like you won't have access to coffee or wine or chocolate. It's like the same thing with a toddler. You're not going to be able to have that. Like it's very similar in our food system for the changes that we have to make as individuals, but also collectively as those that have power and decision. There is an impending food crisis. We have an opportunity right now to change our ways. This is a collective problem. This is a collective action problem, right? We can do this together. And I think part of it is we have to simplify the messaging, and then we just have to empower all the different actors to ladder up to those main goals.
A couple of responses to that. So it is ultimately a gigantic, complex, intertwined problem. But at the same time, change happens at the local level. A local person to pick up the phone or to send the email, or many, many emails I hear from you. So that is one. But I think the other one is, from a messaging perspective, it's you have this dilemma between instant gratification versus long-term ramification. And I think the third one that I always think through, but who do I trust? Because if you tell me that the world is on fire and we have this glooming food crisis, hanging above us, why are you telling me that? So what is in it for you? And will I trust you because you represent government A or B? And I think it's so hard these days to really to think through from, but who would I trust? And where would I find you in my own little eco bubble of what it is I want to hear?
First of all, I think there's no one answer, right? I think we have to look at all the different avenues, whether it's the influencer, it's the schools, it's the academic, it's the government, it's all of the above. And at the same time, putting more resources into those trusted institutions and making sure that the local news is robust. Like how many folks are actually paying for their local paper? I think that would help. If every single person that listens to your podcast, Michael, would subscribe to their local paper, they would have more resources to provide better information. And if we did spend less time on TikTok, then there would be less of those influencers just spouting misinformation. I think this is where, to this agency perspective, we all have to hold ourselves accountable, going to different sources for information. I mean, I'm guilty of it myself, the algorithms that come my way. I mean, I have a whole tab for local press. I have a whole tab for national press. I make sure I'm reading it every day. I force myself. So I'm making sure I'm looking at a diversity of outlets. One of my favorite aspects of starting Food Corps was that in the first year, and this was totally unsustainable, is that we had 50 AmeriCorps service members, and I single-handedly picked a mentor in the food system for every single AmeriCorps member. And I asked them, who do you want to be in the world? How do you want to show up? And I then asked favors of all of our friends in the food system to say, hey, would you be a mentor to so-and-so in Iowa? Would you be a mentor to so-and-so in Mississippi? And to this day, a lot of those folks are connected. And some of the service members are now in the government. Some have become lawyers. Others are working at various foundations and what have you. But to this day, it's one of my favorite, and I feel like one of my most impactful contributions was making this connection between the up and coming folks in this food system and then who they wanted to show up, and doing that lessons learned and figuring out, again, how they wanted to show up in the world, because it was a path of connection. And I think in a lot of our work, Michael, what I've been missing is that we have stopped doing these, like us coming together, right? And we used to come together more and talk about what our issues are and learnings and challenging ourselves. You were bringing us together on a regular basis and forcing the hand of some accountability and whatnot. But that interaction and that connection is critical for the change that we all seek in this space to build. Like we were talking earlier about how I've taken on almost all these different roles in the food system. I've been trying to intentionally create those networks amongst those in this space so they can learn from the other side. to understand the challenges. Because too often, again, we do just work in these silos. When we work in silos, we do not get anywhere because then we just become critics of the others instead of us developing that empathy and that core path to change. And I feel like if we spent more time developing some of those mentorship programs and those cross collaborations, or even more programs for folks to work in different avenues of the food system, then we would see change faster.
Totally agree. I think we can talk for hours about all the fun stuff in our broader system. I have one final question for you. So, a variety of change makers early on in the career listening to the podcast as well. We've spoken today quite a bit about the complexity, and it's hard, it takes forever, and all that good stuff. But we continue to show up because it is so interesting, it's so rewarding. You meet so many interesting individuals. It's food, it's just fun, it's lovely. What advice would you have for somebody early on getting started and ultimately driving change in food systems? What advice would you give to them? What to do, what not to do, how to get started?
Talk to you. That's what I'd say. I would push them to get uncomfortable in the spaces that they don't understand or maybe what they're criticizing. So if it's someone who's criticizing corporate America, then I would actually encourage them to try to get an internship or a job in corporate America so they understand how that part of it works. If it's someone who's criticizing government programs, go work in the USDA. If it's someone who is trying to truly understand why the farm worker system isn't more just, then do it. Get in there. Go roll up your sleeves. That's one bit of it, is don't hesitate to try. The other piece is something I mentioned earlier is truly to focus on your zone of genius, like the part that you're fired up and you're excelling in, whether it's policy communications, whether it's supply chain, logistics, and then hire the people around you to make you better, to challenge you, who fill in those gaps and who make you better. And I think that's actually one of my weak spots, is bringing in more people to do the other parts of it. I highly encourage that. And I think the other part is don't take no for an answer and just keep pushing and speaking up and showing up. I think one of the reasons I'm even having this honor of talking to you today, Michael, is that I didn't give up and I didn't stop. There's so many people who don't like public speaking. There's so many people who are brilliant and just have fabulous ideas. If I could tell you the number of farmers that I've talked to who would loathe to stand up in a room, but are some of the smartest people, again, on the planet, they're the ones we need to be giving pen to, right? They're the ones we need to be working on developing policies with and for. And I think that is where, again, my big push is zone of genius, speak up, show up, and develop lines of empathy. To be a better change maker is to understand all the different avenues of change it takes to get things done.
Love it. Deb, thank you so much for spending time with me today and sharing your incredible set of experiences with the audience. And I mean it with sincerity. You're one of the very few who has such a diverse set of experiences. And it makes you really, really unique because you're not just in your own thing deep with lots of experiences. But this is diversity. It's amazing.
Oh, it's very kind. I think part of it is I have no ego, so I don't have an issue with being wrong and trying to figure things out. So it's fun.
It was so much fun imagining a better food system with Deb today. And reflecting on today's interview, here are my top 3 takeaways for changemakers. Changemaking is a dynamic and non-linear journey. Deb's diverse and rich career spans the private sector, government, academia, agriculture, and more. Her unwavering focus on impact making, with each experience contributing to larger systemic movements toward positive change, is what helped her keep moving forward. And whether you're new to change making or a seasoned veteran, keep agile, advocate for yourself and your cause, and fully embrace the process. Being a change maker transcends age and experience. Anyone can be a change maker. The key, though, is speaking and showing up. Be persistent, be relentless, learn by doing, and actively listen to those with direct experience with the issues you are addressing. I also loved what Deb said about finding your zone of genius, including the unique skills you can provide and what gets you excited. When navigating complex systems, remember to balance the macro and micro perspectives. Complex systems are extremely interdependent, and meaningful change just takes time. Let's talk about the Let's Move initiative. The team set goals that will be achieved 20 years down the road, so operationalizing that work doesn't happen overnight. When change unfolds over a long time horizon, maintaining a consistent direction is extraordinarily important. For more information about the topics to discuss in today's show, be sure to check out the show notes. And thank you for joining us for this episode. If you liked what you've heard, subscribe to the podcast at foodlabtalk.com or wherever you listen to your podcast. And be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube at Food Lab Talk. As we close, I invite you to pursue your own bold vision and take whatever action you can take towards a better food system. Imagine, believe, and most importantly, act. See you next time.